High Point Mansion sits on a hill above Hershey, Pennsylvania. 22 rooms, colonial and Greek revival architecture. White pillars, large front porch. Built in 1908 for $53,433, roughly $1.7 million in 2025 dollars. Milton Hershey was 51 years old when construction began. He'd already failed 3 times. Philadelphia, 1876, bankruptcy. Denver, 1883, bankruptcy. New York, 1886, police confiscated his equipment for non-payment. Each time he started over. Each time he failed. Then came Lancaster Caramels. Success. By 1900, he sold the Lancaster Caramel Company for $1 million, about $37 million today. He kept the chocolate division, the part nobody else wanted. He built a chocolate factory in Dairy Church, Pennsylvania in 1903. A company town grew around it. Workers' houses, a school, a bank, a department store. The town was renamed Hershey. By 1907, the chocolate business was booming. Milton needed a home. High Point was modest by industrialist standards. George Vanderbilt's Biltmore had 250 rooms and cost $10 million. Andrew Carnegie's mansion in New York had 64 rooms. Henry Clay Frick's Fifth Avenue Palace sprawled across an entire city block. Milton and his wife Catherine, Kitty he called her, built 22 rooms. No swimming pool, no ballroom, no bar. Just a comfortable home with an open floor plan, large windows, and Catherine's preferred bright colors. Blue room, green room, gold room for Milton, rose pink for Kitty. They moved in during 1908. Kitty was 41, Milton was 51. They'd been married 10 years. They had no children. They never would. Kitty had been ill for 6 years by the time High Point was finished. A degenerative neurological disease. Locomotor ataxia, the doctors called it, a term that explained nothing. She was losing her balance, her coordination, her ability to walk. She spent more and more time upstairs, in the rose-pink bedroom, looking out the windows at the gardens she'd planned, the roses she'd planted, the grounds she could no longer walk. She died there on March 25, 1915. She was 43 years old. Milton couldn't stay. The house he'd built for her, the home where they had entertained guests and hosted dinners and tried to build a life despite the childlessness that haunted them, it was unbearable without her. He traveled. He threw himself into the school they'd founded for orphan boys in 1909. In 1918, 3 years after Kitty's death, he donated his entire fortune, $60 million, roughly $1.2 billion today, to the Milton Hershey School Trust. He made the orphans his heirs. In 1930, 15 years after Kitty died, he gave High Point to the newly formed Hershey Country Club. He kept an apartment on the 2nd floor. The house built for love became a golf club house. Today, High Point is owned by the Hershey Trust Company. The mansion serves as their offices. Tours are offered on select Saturdays for $17.50. Visitors see the cut-glass torchlier Milton bought at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, the stained glass window on the grand staircase, the Ivanhoe murals in the billiard room, Catherine's rose-pink bedroom. The guides tell stories of Milton and Kitty, how they traveled to Europe, how they entertained friends, how they loved the house. They don't always mention that Kitty lived there only 7 years before her body gave out, that Milton couldn't bear to stay after she died, that the roses Kitty planted in memorial were transplanted to Hershey Gardens in 1942 when the country club built a swimming pool, or that Milton gave his entire fortune to orphans because he and Kitty couldn't have children of their own, or that the school trust is now worth $17.4 billion and doesn't know how to spend it, that $1 billion in income sits unused, that critics call the spending indefensibly low, that the gift meant to help poor children has become a financial embarrassment. This isn't a story about a mansion built with dirty money. It's a story about a house built with clean money, earned after decades of failure by a man who succeeded too late to enjoy it with the woman he loved. And it's about what happens when generosity becomes so vast it overwhelms the purpose it was meant to serve. If you enjoy stories about American industrialists who failed repeatedly before succeeding, about women whose illnesses robbed them of the lives they'd planned, about houses that became monuments to grief, about fortunes so large they've become burdens, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which other mansions tied to American brands I should explore next. Your support makes these investigations into the real stories behind corporate empires possible. Thank you for being here. Let's begin with the failures, because before there was High Point, before there was Hershey, Pennsylvania, before there was chocolate, there was a boy who left school at 14 and spent the next 15 years losing everything. Milton Snavely Hershey was born September 13, 1857, in a farmhouse near Derry Church, Pennsylvania. His father, Henry, was a dreamer, failed farmer, failed businessman, a man perpetually chasing the next scheme. His mother, Fanny, was a Mennonite, practical, religious, devoted to her son. Milton attended school sporadically. His father moved the family often, chasing opportunities that never materialized. By 14, Milton had completed 4th grade. His formal education ended. He was apprenticed to a printer in Lancaster. He hated it. The work was tedious, the hours long. After a dispute with his employer, he was fired. His mother found him a new apprenticeship, Joseph Royer, a Lancaster confectioner. Milton learned to make candy, taffy, caramels, ice cream. He was good at it. He worked for Royer for 4 years, from 1872 to 1876. At 18, Milton decided to open his own candy shop in Philadelphia. His Aunt Mattie Snavely loaned him money. His mother helped. His father showed up with ideas and no capital. The shop failed. 6 years of struggle. Milton made good candy, but he had no business sense. He couldn't manage money. He extended too much credit. He trusted the wrong people. By 1882, Philadelphia was over. Milton was 25 and bankrupt. His aunt's money was gone. His creditors were circling. He left for Denver. His father was there, chasing a silver mining scheme. Milton took a job with a local confectioner and learned a new technique, adding fresh milk to caramel to make it richer, creamier, better. He lasted a year, then moved to Chicago, then New Orleans, then New York City. In 1886, at age 29, Milton opened M.S. Hershey Candy Company in New York. He made caramels using the Denver method, fresh milk, carefully cooked. He hired a few employees. He borrowed money from family. He worked 18-hour days. It failed. His equipment was confiscated by police in 1886 for non-payment to creditors. Milton had nothing. 29 years old, 3 bankruptcies, no prospects. He returned to Lancaster, humiliated. His mother took him in. His father disappeared. Family members refused to lend him more money. He was a known failure, a bad risk. But Lancaster had something New York didn't, a market for fresh caramels made with local milk. Milton borrowed $700 from a local banker who'd known him as a child. He rented a small workspace. He started making caramels again. This time, it worked. By 1894, the Lancaster Caramel Company employed 1,300 workers. Milton had contracts with candy distributors across America and Europe. His Crystal A caramels were nationally known. He was 37 and finally successful. In 1893, he attended the Chicago World's Columbian Exposition. In the machinery hall, he saw a German chocolate-making exhibit. Machinery that could mass-produce chocolate. Milton was fascinated. He ordered equipment and set up a chocolate division within the Lancaster Caramel Company. He experimented, coating caramels in chocolate, making chocolate bars, baking chocolate, cocoa powder. In 1898, at age 41, Milton married Catherine Elizabeth Sweeney. She was 30 years old, Irish Catholic from Jamestown, New York. She'd worked at a confectionery shop where Milton was a customer. They married in New York City on May 25, 1898, at St. Patrick's Cathedral. It was a small ceremony. Milton's mother didn't attend. She disapproved of Catherine's Catholic faith. They traveled: Europe, Egypt, Mexico. Kitty loved to travel. Milton, awkward and workaholic, learned to relax in her company. They settled in Lancaster. Milton continued expanding the chocolate business. In 1900, he sold the Lancaster Caramel Company to the American Caramel Company for $1 million. He kept the chocolate equipment and the rights to manufacture chocolate. Most people thought he was insane. Chocolate was a luxury item, expensive, consumed mainly by the wealthy. Caramel was the proven business. Chocolate was a gamble. Milton didn't care. He'd gambled before and lost. This time felt different. He bought farmland near Dairy Church where he'd been born. Plenty of milk from local dairy farms, access to railroads, space to build. In 1903, he broke ground on a chocolate factory. He also began planning a town, not just a factory, but a community, workers' housing, a school, a trolley system, parks. He called it Hershey. The factory opened in 1905. Production began with milk chocolate bars, 5 cents each, affordable, mass market. By 1906, Hershey Chocolate Company was producing Hershey's Kisses. By 1907, annual sales exceeded $5 million. Milton needed a home. He and Kitty had been renting in Lancaster. In 1905, he contracted with architect C. Emlyn Urban to design a mansion on a hill overlooking the factory. Construction took 3 years, delays due to weather, materials, design changes. The cost, $53,433 for the house itself, according to Urban's invoice. Total cost, including furnishings and landscaping, approached $100,000. Kitty oversaw the decoration. She chose bright colors. She commissioned custom furniture from Philadelphia and New York. She selected a cut-glass torchair Milton had admired at the 1893 exposition. It was specially designed to fit the circular entry hall. The Rudy Glass Company in York created stained glass windows for the grand staircase and the octagonal breakfast room. Murals depicting scenes from Sir Walter Scott's Ivanhoe were painted in Milton's billiard room. It was a gracious home, comfortable, far less ostentatious than the mansions of Milton's peers. They moved in during 1908. Milton was 51, Kitty was 41. They should have had decades together. They had 7 years. Kitty's illness had begun in 1902, shortly after they moved to Hershey. At first, just minor symptoms, stumbling, losing her balance. She blamed fatigue. But it got worse. By 1908, when they moved into High Point, she was using a cane. By 1910, she needed assistance walking. By 1912, she couldn't walk unassisted at all. The doctors couldn't explain it. Locomotor ataxia, they said, a degeneration of the spinal cord affecting movement and coordination. Progressive, incurable, fatal. Modern doctors reviewing historical accounts suspect it might have been a form of multiple sclerosis or a paraneoplastic syndrome or a neurodegenerative disease without a current equivalent. The records are incomplete. The diagnosis was vague even by 1910's standards. What's clear, Kitty's body was failing. Her mind remained sharp, her personality intact, but her ability to move, to walk, to live independently, gone. She spent most of her time upstairs in the rose-pink bedroom. Staff helped her dress. A wheelchair was brought in. She could still direct the household, still plan menus, still entertain when she felt strong enough. But the woman who'd traveled to Europe, who'd walked through Cairo markets, who'd hiked in Swiss mountains, she was trapped. Milton hired the best doctors. He took her to specialists in Philadelphia, New York, Europe. No one could help. The disease progressed. In 1909, while Kitty was still mobile enough to participate, Milton and Kitty signed the deed establishing the Hershey Industrial School, a boarding school for orphan boys, poor white male orphans between 4 and 8 years old, the deed specified. The decision was driven by childlessness. Milton and Kitty desperately wanted children. They tried. It hadn't happened. The reasons aren't documented. Infertility was a private shame in that era. The school was their solution. If they couldn't have children, they'd parent other people's children. They donated 486 acres and enough money to house, feed, and educate the boys.
The first 4 students arrived in September 1910. The school started in the homestead, a farmhouse on the property. Small, simple, a handful of boys living with house parents, learning farm work and basic academics. Kitty was involved in the planning. She met the first students. She reviewed menus, curricula, house rules. But by 1912, she was too ill to visit the school regularly. By 1914, she was almost completely paralyzed. Milton was consumed with work. The chocolate company was expanding rapidly. He was building housing for workers, expanding the factory, dealing with labor issues, managing production. But he was also watching his wife die slowly. There's a photograph from around 1910, Milton and Kitty standing with friends on the front porch of High Point. Kitty is seated. Milton stands behind her, his hand on her shoulder. She's smiling, but her posture is rigid. She's already struggling. By 1915, she couldn't leave her bedroom.
March 25, 1915. Kitty was bedridden. The doctors said it was a matter of days. Milton sat with her. He held her hand. He talked to her, though she could barely respond. Her body had shut down. Only her eyes remained alert. According to family accounts, on the day she died, Kitty asked Milton to send for champagne. Not for herself, she was too weak to drink. For him. She didn't want him there when she died. She wanted him to have a small celebration, a moment of lightness somewhere else in the house. She didn't want his last memory to be watching her final breath. Milton left. He went downstairs. He opened champagne with staff members, a strange, quiet toast to a dying woman. When he returned upstairs, Kitty was gone, 43 years old. She was buried in the Hershey cemetery, a small plot Milton had set aside for himself and Kitty. He had a simple marker installed: Catherine E. Hershey, 1871, 1915. Milton didn't stay at High Point. He couldn't. Every room reminded him of her. The rose-pink bedroom, the breakfast room where they'd eaten together, the parlor where they'd hosted guests, the gardens she'd planned. He started traveling. Europe, Cuba, South America, anywhere but Hershey. He poured himself into the school. In 1918, 3 years after Kitty's death, Milton made a shocking decision. He donated his entire fortune, all of his Hershey Company stock, roughly $60 million, equivalent to $1.2 billion today, to the Milton Hershey School Trust. He made the orphans his heirs. Not his cousins, not his extended family, not business partners, orphan boys he'd never met. The deed of trust was ironclad. The money could only be used for the school. The endowment principal couldn't be touched. Only the income could be spent. The school would exist in perpetuity. Milton kept enough money to live on, a modest income by his standards. Everything else went to the school. His relatives were furious. His cousins protested. They'd expected to inherit. Milton didn't care. Kitty would have approved. That was enough. By 1920, the school had 100 students. By 1930, 800 students. The campus expanded. More housing, more facilities, a vocational training center. Milton visited regularly. He ate meals with the boys. He asked about their lives. He checked on their progress. Some boys remember him as a kind, grandfatherly figure. Others remembered him as distant, formal, a businessman playing at Philanthropy. But he was there. The orphans were his children now. In 1918, Milton had a rose garden planted at High Point, east of the mansion, edged with boxwood and peonies. An arch with climbing American Beauty roses marked the entrance to the woods. It was a memorial to Kitty, her favorite flowers, her taste. Milton visited the garden. He walked through it alone, thinking of her. But he still couldn't live in the house.
He traveled constantly. Cuba, where he'd built a sugar plantation and another company town. Europe, where he inspected chocolate production methods. Across America, visiting facilities and meeting franchisees. High Point sat mostly empty. Staff maintained it. Milton kept his rooms on the second floor, but he was rarely there. In 1930, 15 years after Kitty's death, Milton gave High Point to the Hershey Country Club. The club had been formed that year as a recreational facility for Hershey employees and residents. Milton donated the mansion as the clubhouse. He kept his second-floor apartment. He still visited occasionally, but the house was no longer his. In 1942, the country club built a swimming pool. The location required removing Kitty's rose garden. The roses were transplanted to Hershey Gardens, a public botanical garden of Milton had established in 1937. The memorial garden became part of a larger collection. Milton visited Hershey Gardens frequently in his later years. He walked among the roses. Staff said he always paused at the section where Kitty's roses grew. He never remarried. Friends introduced him to women. Colleagues suggested it would be good for him. He refused. He carried a photograph of Kitty in his pocket. Every night before bed, he kissed it. Staff who worked in his later years described the ritual. Milton sitting in his private apartment, looking at Kitty's picture, kissing it, placing it on his bedside table. For 30 years, every single night. He died October 13, 1945, at age 88. Pneumonia. He'd been in declining health for months. He was buried next to Kitty in Hershey Cemetery. The marker was updated. Milton S. Hershey, 1857 to 1945. Together again, 43 years after her death. 30 years of grief ended.
The numbers tell the story of High Point and Milton's fortune. High Point construction cost, $53,433 in 1908, roughly $1.7 million in 2025 dollars. Total cost, including furnishings and landscaping, approximately $100,000 in 1908, roughly $3.2 million today. Rooms, 22. Staff, 3 to 4. Housekeeper, houseman, housemaid, chauffeur. The housemaid position turned over 22 times in 11 years. Years Milton and Kitty lived there together, 7, 1908 to 1915. Years Milton kept it after Kitty's death, 15, 1915 to 1930. Lancaster Caramel Company sale price 1900, $1 million, roughly $37 million in 2025 dollars. Milton's fortune when he donated it to the school trust, 1918, $60 million, roughly $1.2 billion in 2025 dollars. Current value of the Milton Hershey School Trust, 2021, $17.4 billion. Hershey Company stock owned by the trust, controlling interest, roughly 80% of voting shares. Number of students at Milton Hershey School, 1910, 4. Number of students 1930, 800. Number of students 2000, roughly 1,000. Number of students 2019, 2,189, all-time high. Amount spent per student annually 2020, approximately $139,000 in total costs. Tuition, housing, medical, dental, food, everything. Unspent income accumulated by the Trust 2020, over $1 billion. Percentage of endowment income spent annually, approximately 1.5% according to critics. Required spending if Milton Hershey School were classified as a foundation, 5% of endowment annually, which would be roughly $870 million based on a $17.4 billion endowment. Actual spending, 2020, roughly $300 million. Gap, $570 million per year, unspent. The school isn't legally required to spend like a foundation. Different rules apply to operating charities. But critics, including alumni and legal experts, have called the low spending rate ludicrous and indefensibly low. Georgetown law professor Brian Gale said the trust can't seem to conceivably find any way to spend this pile of money.
The problem isn't greed. The problem is the deed Milton signed in 1918. It says the endowment principal can't be touched. Only the income can be spent, and the income must be spent on the school. As the Hershey Company grew into a Fortune 500 corporation, the endowment exploded. The school couldn't keep up. Even doubling enrollment between 2000 and 2019, they couldn't spend fast enough. Milton wanted to help orphans. He succeeded. He succeeded so much that the school can't figure out how to deploy the money. The gift has become a burden.
The mansion's interior reveals how Milton and Kitty lived. The entry hall was circular. The cut-glass torchère, purchased at the 1893 Chicago Exposition, stood at the center, casting prismatic light across walls and ceiling. C.E. Emlyn Urban designed the hall specifically to showcase the torchère. The first floor was open concept, unusual for 1908. No doors between living room, dining room, library, and entry hall. You could walk from one space to another without obstruction. Milton liked the flow. Kitty liked the light. The living room had glass-fronted bookcases filled with standard authors, Dickens, Scott, Twain. A fireplace with gas logs. Milton sat there in winter evenings reading newspapers and trade journals. The parlor connected to the living room. Formal furniture, a space for entertaining guests. Milton and Kitty hosted dinner parties there. Small gatherings, usually 8 to 12 people. The circular dining room, later removed, was designed so no guest would have a bad seat. Milton hated corners. He'd sat in too many corners at bad tables during his traveling years. The octagonal breakfast room had stained glass windows by the Rudy Glass Company. Morning light filtered through colored glass, casting blue and amber patterns on the walls. Milton and Kitty ate breakfast there, looking out over the grounds. The billiard room was Milton's retreat. Ivanhoe murals covered the walls, scenes of nights and tournaments. An ornate humidor in Art Nouveau style held his cigars. Milton smoked with business associates. He played billiards poorly, but enjoyed the ritual. Upstairs, bedrooms. The blue room, the green room, the gold room, Milton's, each named for its dominant color. Kitty's room, rose pink. Walls, carpet, curtains. She loved pink. The room faced south, catching afternoon sun. She could see the gardens from her windows. In her final years, bedridden, the view was all she had. Milton's room, gold, darker, heavier. Victorian furniture he'd preferred before Kitty modernized his taste. A private space where he could retreat from the bright, cheerful house Kitty had designed. The bathroom Kitty used had a large tub. Staff helped her bathe in her final years. The indignity of needing assistance for everything. A solarium was added later, during the 1930s when Milton kept the second-floor apartment. Outdoor space where he could sit, have breakfast, feed ducks on a rooftop pond, since removed. The staff areas were minimal. A housekeeper's room, a houseman's quarters. The housemaid changed 22 times in 11 years, constant turnover. One source suggests conflict between the housekeeper, Mrs. Bertha Candoni, and the maids. Mrs. Candoni spoke 7 languages, had traveled with Kitty in Europe, and ran the household with firm control. Maids didn't last. Total square footage, roughly 10,000 square feet, counting all floors and basement. Modest by industrialist standards. For comparison, Biltmore, 178,926 square feet. The Breakers in Newport, 65,000 square feet. Even Colonel Sanders' Blackwood Hall, 5,000 square feet, was proportionally similar for a man with far less wealth. Milton didn't build to impress. He built a home. Kitty decorated it. They lived there 7 years before she died. Then it was just a house. Then it was a country club. Then it was corporate offices. Now it's a museum. Catherine Elizabeth Sweeney was born April 14, 1871, in Jamestown, New York. Irish Catholic family, working class. She took a job at a confectionery shop. Milton was a customer. He was in Jamestown on business, visiting candy distributors. He noticed Kitty. She was 25, he was 36. Accounts say Milton was awkward, socially uncomfortable. He'd spent his life failing, working, failing again. He had no experience with courtship. But he was persistent. He visited the shop repeatedly. He bought candy he didn't need. He asked Kitty to dinner. They married in 1898 after a brief courtship. Milton was 41, Kitty 30, old for a first marriage by Victorian standards. Kitty was Catholic. Milton's Mennonite mother, Fanny, disapproved. She didn't attend the wedding. The relationship between Fanny and Kitty was strained for years. But Milton and Kitty were happy. They traveled, Europe multiple times, Egypt, Mexico. Kitty loved adventure. Milton, serious and work-focused, relaxed around her. Photographs from their early marriage show Kitty smiling, confident, Milton beside her, stiff, uncomfortable in front of cameras, but content. They wanted children. It didn't happen. No records explain why. Infertility was private shame. Medical intervention was limited. By 1902, Kitty's illness began. For 13 years, she lived with a progressive degenerative disease that slowly paralyzed her. She didn't complain. Accounts describe her as cheerful, resilient, engaged. She decorated High Point. She hosted guests. She helped plan the school for orphans. She managed the household even when she couldn't walk. By 1914, she was almost completely paralyzed. By March 15, she was bedridden. The champagne story, asking Milton to leave so he wouldn't watch her die, fits the accounts of her personality. Thoughtful, protective of him, wanting to spare him pain even in her final moments. She died at 43, 13 years of illness, 7 years living in the house she decorated, buried in a small cemetery plot beside the space reserved for Milton. No children, no legacy beyond the school she and Milton founded. Except Milton never forgot her. 30 years of kissing her photograph every night, 30 years of visiting her roses, 30 years of grief. When he died in 1945, he was buried beside her, together in death as they'd been in life for only 10 years of marriage before illness consumed her. The unspoken tragedy: Kitty decorated a house for a life she'd never fully live. She planned gardens she'd never walk. She hosted dinners in a dining room she'd eventually need help to reach. She smiled in photographs while her body failed. High Point wasn't just Milton's mansion. It was Kitty's dream, built and lost in 7 years. The Milton Hershey School opened in 1910 with 4 boys. By 1918, when Milton donated his fortune, there were dozens. By 1930, 800 students. By 1945, when Milton died, over 1,000. The original deed specified poor, healthy, white male orphans between ages 4 and 8, boys only, white only, orphans only. These restrictions held for decades. In 1968, after the Supreme Court ordered racial desegregation of Girard College, a similar orphan school in Philadelphia, founded by Stephen Girard in 1848, Milton Hershey School admitted its first black student. School officials claimed the decision was unrelated to the court ruling. Timing suggests otherwise. In 1976, the school expanded its definition of orphan to include social orphans, children with single parents, divorced parents, or parents unable to care for them. True orphans, both parents dead, had become rare. In November 1976, the school successfully petitioned Dauphin County Court to admit girls. The first 8 girls arrived in March 1977. By 2000, the school was co-educational, racially integrated, and serving children from low-income families regardless of parental status. By 2020, enrollment reached 2,189 students, the highest in the school's history, and the endowment, $17.4 billion. The problem became obvious. The school was spending roughly $300 million per year. The endowment was generating far more income. The unspent income accumulated $1 billion by 2020. Critics pointed out the absurdity. Milton wanted to help orphans. The school could help more, expand enrollment, lower admission standards, build satellite campuses. The trust's response: the deed restricts what we can do. We can only spend income, not principal. We must maintain the endowment in perpetuity. In 1963, the trust had successfully petitioned the court to use $50 million to build a hospital, now Penn State Milton S. Hershey Medical Center. The court approved under Cypress doctrine.
altering the deed's terms while staying close to the founder's intent.
Alumni were bitter. The hospital wasn't for orphans, it was a general community hospital. The trust had diverted Milton's gift. In 2002, the trust board decided to sell its controlling stake in Hershey Company. The sale could bring $10 to $12 billion, they reasoned, diversify the portfolio, reduce risk. Hershey residents rioted, workers protested, alumni sued. Pennsylvania Attorney General Mike Fisher investigated. The sale was blocked. The trust backed down. But the controversy revealed deep dysfunction. Board members were paid over $100,000 annually. The for-profit Hershey Trust Company, separate entity, same board members, managed the endowment and collected fees. Conflicts of interest abounded. In 2011, board member Robert Reese, grandson of H.B. Reese, inventor of Reese's peanut butter cups, sued the trust, alleging board members were wasting assets. He cited a $12 million purchase of a money-losing golf course, appraised at $5 million, bought for more than double. Reese later dropped the suit, citing deteriorating eyesight. The Attorney General settled with the trust, imposing oversight and conflict of interest reforms. In 2021, board chairman Robert Heist, himself a 1982 graduate of the school, sued for access to financial records. He'd been requesting detailed budgets since 2019. The school refused. The dispute revealed ongoing questions about spending. Where does $300 million per year actually go? Why isn't the school serving more students? Why does $1 billion in unspent income sit idle? The trust's answer, we're bound by Milton's deed. We're doing what he wanted. Milton's 1949 graduate John Kinyard, who had dinner with Milton as a student, disagreed. His heart was to provide for orphans, Kinyard said. Milton would want the school to spend more. The tragedy. Milton's generosity has created a problem. Too much money. Not enough ways to spend it within the deed's restrictions. A fortune meant to help poor children, now so large it's become an embarrassment. High Point changed hands multiple times after Milton donated it to the country club in 1930. 1930 to 1978. Hershey Country Club Clubhouse. Milton kept his second-floor apartment. He lived there until moving to a smaller residence in the 1940s. The club added a swimming pool in 1942, requiring removal of Kitty's rose garden. 1978. Hershey Foods Corporation, now the Hershey Company, moved its offices into High Point after a multi-million-dollar restoration. The mansion was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. 1983. High Point was designated a National Historic Landmark, recognizing its association with Milton Hershey's transformation of the chocolate industry and his philanthropy. Late 1980s. Hershey Foods moved out. Early 1990s. Hershey Trust Company moved in. They restored portions of the mansion to its original 1908 appearance, using vintage photographs as guides. 2001. Major preservation work, paint analysis, replication of historic glazed and stenciled wall finishes in the grand stair hall, hallways, and parlor. Conservation of the Ivanhoe murals in the billiard room. 2015 to 2020, limited public tours offered on select Saturdays. Tickets $17.50 for adults. Tours last 60 to 75 minutes. Groups limited to 12. Late 2020, tours suspended due to COVID-19 pandemic. 2025, tours remain on hiatus due to ongoing renovation. Planned resumption, spring 2026. The Hershey Trust Company still uses High Point as offices, boardrooms, meeting spaces. The building serves a corporate function while maintaining its historic character. Maintaining a 1908 structure for modern office use is expensive. Electrical systems, plumbing, HVAC, accessibility, fire suppression, network infrastructure. The trust has the money. The endowment is $17.4 billion. Preserving High Point is trivial compared to the school's operating budget. The irony, High Point costs pennies to maintain, yet the school, meant to be Milton's primary legacy, can't figure out how to spend its fortune. Tours emphasize Milton and Kitty's romance, their travels, their philanthropy, the house as evidence of success after failure. What tours don't emphasize, Kitty's illness, Milton's 30-year grief, the childlessness that drove the school's founding, the school's current financial dysfunction. Visitors see beautiful rooms, stained glass, murals, the circular entry hall with the torchère. They don't see Kitty's bedroom where she died paralyzed at 43. They don't see Milton's room where he kissed her photograph every night for 30 years. They see success. They don't see the cost. Milton kissed Kitty's photograph every night before bed. Staff recorded the ritual. 30 years, from 1915 until his death in 1945. The photograph showed Kitty in her 30s, before the illness consumed her, smiling, healthy, the woman Milton married, not the woman who died. He carried it everywhere, tucked in his jacket pocket. When he traveled, the photograph traveled. When he moved residences, the photograph moved. At night, in his private apartment, Milton would sit. He'd remove the photograph from his pocket or from the bedside table. He'd look at it. Then he'd kiss it. Then he'd place it back. Every single night. For 30 years. Friends asked if he'd consider remarrying. Business associates suggested he was lonely. The answer was always no. Kitty was irreplaceable. He visited Hershey Gardens frequently in his later years. He'd walk slowly, by his 80s he needed a cane, to the section where Kitty's transplanted roses grew. He'd stand there. Staff said he never spoke during these visits. He just looked at the roses. In the spring, when they bloomed, he visited more often. He died October 13, 1945. Pneumonia. He'd been declining for months. He was 88. Staff prepared his body for burial. They placed Kitty's photograph in his jacket pocket. She went with him to the grave. He was buried beside her in Hershey Cemetery, the plot he'd reserved when Kitty died 30 years earlier. The marker was updated. Milton S. Hershey, 1857-1945. Next to Catherine E. Hershey, 1871-1915. Together, finally. After Kitty's death, Milton had lived longer without her than he'd lived with her. 43 years total. 10 healthy, 3 watching her decline, 30 mourning. That's the measure of grief. 30 years of kissing a photograph. 30 years of visiting roses. 30 years of sleeping alone. He built a chocolate empire. He founded a school. He created a town. He became one of America's most famous industrialists. But he never stopped missing his wife. High Point stands as evidence. A house built for a woman who lived there 7 years. A rose garden transplanted when she was gone. An apartment where Milton kissed her picture every night for 3 decades. The mansion is beautiful. The legacy is grief. The Hershey Industrial School opened with 4 boys in September 1910. They lived in the homestead, a farmhouse on donated land. House parents raised them. Farm chores taught discipline. Basic academics prepared them for work. The goal wasn't college, it was productive citizenship. Orphans learning trades. Milton visited regularly. He ate meals with the boys. He asked about their studies. He checked their living conditions. One graduate, John Kinnard, class of 1949, recalled dining with Milton. The old man asked about school, about the food, about whether the boys were happy. Kinnard remembered Milton as genuinely interested, not performative. Other students remember Milton as distant, formal, an old man playing grandfather but not convincing. By the 1930s, enrollment exceeded 500. The campus expanded. Student homes, residential buildings housing 12 to 16 boys with house parents, vocational buildings, academic classrooms, a chapel, a sports complex. By Milton's death in 1945, over 1,000 boys lived on campus. The deed specified white male orphans ages 4 to 8. That remained policy until the 1960s. Black students were excluded until 1968. The school's official justification, Milton's deed specified poor white male orphans. The restriction was legal under existing law until civil rights litigation forced change. Girls were excluded until 1977. Again, the deed, male orphans.
The definition of orphan evolved. By the 1970s, true orphans were rare. The school expanded to social orphans, children from broken homes, single-parent families, poverty situations. By 2000, the school served low-income children regardless of parental status. The only requirements: family income below a certain threshold, child between ages 4 and 15 at enrollment, no severe behavioral or learning disabilities. By 2020, enrollment reached 2,189. The campus covered 10,000 acres, over 180 student homes, state-of-the-art facilities, medical clinic, dental clinic, athletic complex, performing arts center. Cost per student, $139,000 annually. That's tuition, room, board, medical, dental, clothing, recreational activities, college prep, everything. For comparison, Exeter Academy, one of America's most elite prep schools, charges roughly $60,000 tuition. Milton Hershey School is free and spends more than double per student. Yet critics say it's not enough. The endowment is $17.4 billion. Enrollment could double. Satellite campuses could be built. Admission standards could be relaxed. The Trust's response: "We're following Milton's vision. The deed says the school must be in Hershey. Expansion is complex." Alumni disagree. Milton's vision was helping orphans. If the endowment allows helping more, then help more. The fight continues. Lawsuits, investigations, attorney general oversight, media scrutiny. And Milton's gift, meant to help poor children, sits largely unspent. $1 billion in accumulated income, a fortune searching for a purpose.
Milton's father, Henry Hershey, was a failure. Charming, persuasive, hopeless with money. He tried farming, failed. Tried business schemes, failed. Tried mining, failed. Tried patent medicine sales, failed. He abandoned the family multiple times. Fanny, Milton's mother, supported herself and the children. Milton grew up watching his father fail. The lesson was clear: don't be like Henry. Milton failed anyway, 3 times before age 30. Philadelphia, Denver, New York. Bankruptcy, confiscation, humiliation. But Milton learned from failure. He identified what worked, milk caramels, and focused. He didn't chase schemes. He didn't diversify. He made caramels until he succeeded. Then he sold the caramel business and bet everything on chocolate. Another gamble, but informed by experience. Henry died in 1904, right as Milton's chocolate business was beginning to succeed. He never saw his son become one of America's richest men. Fanny lived until 1920. She saw Milton's success. She saw the town named Hershey. She saw the school. She never fully accepted Kitty, the Catholic Irish woman who married her Mennonite son. The relationship was cold. After Kitty died in 1915, Fanny moved into High Point with Milton. She stayed 5 years, until her death in 1920. Mother and son living in the house Milton built for his wife. Awkward, tense. But Milton honored his mother. She'd supported him through the failures. He couldn't abandon her. Fanny is buried in Hershey Cemetery, not beside Milton and Kitty, a separate plot. Even in death, the division remained. Milton's family history is marked by failure and loss. His father failed and disappeared. His son never existed. Kitty couldn't have children. His wife died young. His mother outlived his wife and moved into the grief house. The school became his family. The orphans became his heirs. They're the children he and Kitty couldn't have. That's the emotional logic of the 1918 donation. Milton gave his fortune to orphans because they were his substitutes. And now those orphans, or rather their modern equivalents, can't spend the money.
The chocolate business made Milton a multimillionaire, but his wealth came with conditions. Hershey, Pennsylvania was a company town. Milton owned the houses workers rented. He owned the bank. He owned the department store. He owned the utilities. It wasn't feudalism. Workers could leave, but economically, the town depended on Milton. He built it paternalistically. Workers' housing was clean, affordable, well-maintained. Parks and trolleys were free. A public school, a library, a community center, all funded by Milton. But control remained centralized. Milton decided what the town needed. Workers had little input. Strikes were rare, but not unheard of. In 1937, the CIO, Congress of Industrial Organizations, attempted to unionize Hershey workers. The strike lasted 4 days. Loyal workers, many living in company housing, broke the strike violently. They attacked strikers with clubs. The company didn't need to intervene. Workers policed themselves. The message was clear: don't bite the hand that feeds you. Milton opposed unions. He believed his paternalism was sufficient. He provided housing, health care, pensions, profit sharing. Why did workers need a union? Critics argued paternalism wasn't democracy. Workers should negotiate collectively. Dependence on a benevolent employer was fragile. What if the next owner wasn't benevolent? Milton died in 1945. The trust took over. The Hershey Company became a corporation. Paternalism faded. By the 1970s, the company was publicly traded. By the 2000s, it was a multinational corporation. Hershey, Pennsylvania remained the headquarters, but the town's relationship to the company changed. Workers no longer lived in company housing. The bank wasn't company-owned. The utilities were privatized. The town became a normal American small town, except for the smell of chocolate and the massive trust that controlled the company. Milton's vision, a town built around a chocolate factory providing for workers' every need, evolved into something different: corporate, professionalized, less personal. But the school remains. The trust still controls the company. The endowment still grows. Milton's paternalism lives on in the school. He decided orphans needed help. He decided how that help would be structured. He left an ironclad deed ensuring his vision couldn't be altered. Even in death, Milton controls. The trust can't deviate. The deed is law. That's paternalism's legacy, a gift so rigid it becomes a burden.
Catherine's rose garden was planted in 1918, 3 years after her death, east of the mansion, edged with boxwood and peonies. An arch with climbing American beauty roses marked the entrance. Milton visited daily when he was in Hershey. He'd walk from High Point, or later from his smaller apartment, to the garden. He'd sit on a bench. Staff said he'd stay for an hour or more. The roses were Kitty's favorite: pink, red, white. She'd planned extensive gardens for High Point before her illness confined her. The memorial garden was Milton's tribute. He couldn't bring her back, but he could ensure her flowers bloomed. In 1942, the country club built a swimming pool. The construction required removing the rose garden. Milton agreed. He was 85. He'd given the house to the club 12 years earlier. He had no veto power. But he insisted the roses be transplanted to Hershey Gardens, the public botanical garden he'd established in 1937. The transplant was successful. Kitty's roses grew in Hershey Gardens, mingled with thousands of others. Milton visited Hershey Gardens frequently in his final years. By his late 80s, he used a wheelchair. Staff would push him through the paths. He'd stop at the rose section. He'd sit quietly. He never told anyone he was visiting Kitty's roses. He didn't need to. Staff knew. After Milton's death in 1945, Hershey Gardens became one of Pennsylvania's premier botanical destinations. The rose garden expanded. By the 2020s, it contained 7,000 rose bushes representing 275 varieties. Somewhere in that collection, Kitty's original roses grow, grafted, propagated, descendants of the plants she loved. The roses have outlived Kitty by over a century. They've outlived Milton by 80 years. They bloom every spring. Visitors to Hershey Gardens don't know which roses were Kitty's. The labels don't specify. The history isn't marked. But the roses are there. Living memorials to a woman who died at 43, who spent 7 years in a house she decorated, who asked her husband to drink champagne while she died alone. Milton kissed her photograph for 30 years. He visited her roses for decades. He gave his fortune to orphans because he and Kitty couldn't have children. And the roses bloom, silent, beautiful, indifferent to grief. High Point's architecture reflects Milton and Kitty's taste: modest, gracious,
unpretentious. C. Emlyn Urban, the architect, had designed many buildings in Pennsylvania. He understood residential design. He gave Milton and Kitty what they wanted: comfort, not grandeur. The exterior, colonial and Greek revival, white clapboard, pillars, symmetry, traditional American architecture, nothing cutting edge. The interior, open floor plan, rare for 1908. Kitty wanted light and flow. Milton wanted simplicity. Urban delivered both. The Torchiere in the entry hall, Milton's favorite piece, purchased at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. Cut glass, prismatic. Urban designed the circular entry hall specifically to showcase it. The stained glass, Rudy Glass Company, York, Pennsylvania. Custom designs. The octagonal breakfast room windows show flowers and vines. The grand staircase window depicts natural themes. The Ivanhoe murals in the billiard room. Sir Walter Scott was popular in the early 1900s. Milton liked romantic historical fiction. The murals show scenes of knights, tournaments, medieval pageantry. Not high art, but decorative and pleasant. Kitty's color choices bright. Blue room, green room, gold room, rose pink room. Victorian taste was dark and heavy. Kitty wanted light and cheerfulness. The house was wired for electricity from the beginning, rare in 1908, common by 1910. Milton had access to power infrastructure from his factory. Plumbing, modern for 1908. Indoor bathrooms, running water, central heating. The house was comfortable, not primitive. No ballroom, no swimming pool, until the country club added one in 1942. No art gallery, no library of rare books. Just a home. A nice home. A place for two people to live comfortably. For 7 years, it worked. Then Kitty died. Then it became a museum of grief. Today, High Point looks much as it did in 1908. The Trust has preserved it carefully. Vintage paint analysis, period furnishings, careful restoration. Visitors see a beautiful, well-preserved historic house. They don't see the tragedy it contains. That's the function of preservation. Freeze the past, remove the pain, present beauty without context. High Point is beautiful, but its beauty is built on loss. Milton Hershey died October 13, 1945. Pneumonia. He'd been declining for months. 88 years old. He'd outlived Kitty by 30 years, outlived his mother, outlived his business partners, outlived his friends. He spent his final years visiting the school, eating with students, checking progress, making sure his vision endured. He lived simply, a small apartment, modest furnishings, no staff beyond a housekeeper and chauffeur. His wealth was gone, donated to the trust in 1918. He had enough to live on, nothing extravagant. He didn't need extravagance, he needed purpose. The school gave him that. When he died, the school had roughly 1,000 students. The endowment was healthy. The chocolate company was thriving. His vision seemed secure. His body was prepared for burial. Staff placed Kitty's photograph in his pocket. She went with him. He was buried beside her in Hershey Cemetery, together after 30 years apart. The trust continued. The school expanded. The company grew into a global corporation. Milton's name became synonymous with chocolate. Hershey's Kisses, Hershey Bars, Reese's acquired later, Kit Kat licensed in the U.S. His face was nowhere. Unlike Colonel Sanders, Milton didn't become a mascot. His image wasn't used for marketing. The brand was Hershey, not Milton. He would have preferred it that way. He wasn't interested in fame. He was interested in work. And work continued after his death. The school, the company, the trust, all running according to his plans. Except the plans couldn't anticipate a $17.4 billion endowment. They couldn't anticipate $1 billion in unspent income. They couldn't anticipate critics calling the trust ludicrous. Milton's vision was helping orphans. The execution has become controversial. He'd be disappointed, or maybe he'd be proud that the school still exists, still serves children, still follows his deed. Or maybe he'd change the deed, allow more flexibility, permit satellite campuses, expand the mission. We'll never know. He's been dead 80 years. His intentions are frozen in a 1918 legal document. And the school, his legacy, his substitute children, struggles to spend his gift.
The museum at Hershey's Chocolate World doesn't mention the $17.4 billion trust controversy. It doesn't discuss the unspent income. It doesn't explain why the school can't deploy more resources. It tells a simpler story. Milton failed, succeeded, married Kitty, built a town, founded a school, donated his fortune. American dream, rags to riches, philanthropist. The narrative is true. It's also incomplete. High Point tours tell a similar story. Beautiful house, romantic couple, tragic early death, generous legacy. They don't discuss Kitty kissing Kitty's photograph every night for 30 years. They don't describe Kitty's final days, paralyzed in the rose-pink bedroom. They don't explain the childlessness that drove the school's founding. They certainly don't discuss the school's current financial dysfunction. That's heritage tourism. Select the pleasant facts, omit the uncomfortable ones, create a narrative visitors want to hear. Milton and Kitty deserve a fuller story. Milton failed 3 times. He was confiscated, bankrupted, humiliated. He succeeded at age 43, late by any standard. He married at 41. His wife got sick 3 years later and spent 13 years dying. They desperately wanted children. Biology or circumstance prevented it. The pain drove them to create a school for orphans, substitutes for the children they couldn't have. Milton gave his entire fortune to that school. Not because he was a saint, because orphans were his heirs, the children he and Kitty never had. Kitty died at 43. Milton spent 30 years mourning. He kissed her photograph every night. He visited her roses. He ate alone. He worked obsessively. He built a chocolate empire and a company town, but he did it to distract himself from grief. When he died, he was buried beside Kitty, the photograph in his pocket, together after 30 decades apart. That's the real story. Failure, success, love, illness, death, mourning, legacy, dysfunction. High Point is beautiful. The legacy is complicated. The gift is enormous. The execution is flawed. And the roses still bloom. The question isn't whether Milton Hershey was a good man. He was, by all accounts, decent, hardworking, generous. The question is whether his vision, a school for orphans funded in perpetuity by an ironclad trust, still serves its purpose. In 1918, $60 million was enough to run a school for hundreds of boys. In 2025, $17.4 billion is enough to run a school for tens of thousands. But the deed restricts expansion. The school must be in Hershey. It must serve orphans, now redefined as low-income children. It must maintain the endowment principle. The trust can spend only income, and the income has grown so fast that spending it within the deed's restrictions has become nearly impossible. $1 billion in unspent income. Critics call it indefensibly low. Alumni say Milton would be appalled. The trust says they're bound by the deed. They're doing what Milton intended. Both are right and both are wrong. Milton intended to help orphans. The school does. It serves over 2,000 students for free. It spends $139,000 per student annually. It changes lives. But the school could help more. It could serve 10,000 students. It could build satellite campuses. It could expand beyond Hershey. The deed prevents this. Milton's 1918 vision couldn't anticipate the Hershey Company becoming a Fortune 500 corporation. It couldn't anticipate the endowment growing 100-fold. So the gift sits, enormous, underutilized, a fortune searching for a mission. High Point stands as evidence of what Milton built, a modest house for a loving marriage cut short by illness, a memorial to Kitty's roses, a symbol of success earned late. But it's also evidence of what Milton couldn't control. His gift has grown beyond his vision. His deed restricts his heirs. His generosity has created a problem. The school exists. Orphans are helped. Milton's name endures. But the unspent $1 billion haunts the legacy. High Point sits on a hill above Hershey, Pennsylvania. 22 rooms, white clapboard, red roof. Built in 1908 for a couple who wanted children and couldn't have them. Catherine lived there 7 years before a degenerative disease killed her at 43. Milton lived there 10 more years before grief drove him away. He gave the house to a country club. He kept an apartment upstairs where he kissed Kitty's photograph every night for 30 years. The roses Kitty loved were transplanted to Hershey Gardens when the country club built a swimming pool. Milton visited those roses until he died at 88, buried beside Kitty in a cemetery plot he'd reserved 30 years earlier. The school Milton and Kitty founded in 1909, substitutes for the children they couldn't have, now serves 2,189 students. The endowment is $17.4 billion. The unspent income is over $1 billion. The gift meant to help orphans has grown so large the trust can't figure out how to spend it. Milton failed 3 times before succeeding. He built a chocolate empire. He founded a company town. He donated his fortune to orphans. And he spent 30 years mourning his wife. High Point isn't grand. It's not a mansion in the Gilded Age sense. It's a house. Comfortable. Modest. Built for 2 people who loved each other and whose time together was cut short. The guides who lead tours talk about success, rags to riches, American dream, philanthropy. They talk less about grief, about Kitty's 13-year decline, about Milton's 30-year ritual of kissing her photograph, about the childlessness that drove the school's founding. They don't talk about the $17.4 billion endowment or the $1 billion in unspent income. That's not what tourists want to hear. But it is the truth. Milton succeeded late. He loved deeply. He lost early. He grieved long. He gave generously. And his gift has become a burden. High Point stands. The roses bloom. The school operates. The chocolate sells. Milton and Kitty rest side by side in Hershey Cemetery, together after 30 years apart. The question isn't whether the story is tragic. It is. The question is what we do with the legacy. The mansion is beautiful. The endowment is enormous. The vision is frozen in a 1918 deed. And the orphans, Milton's substitute children, his heirs, the reason he gave everything away, wait for the trust to figure out how to spend the fortune he left them. The roses remember, even if the trust has forgotten.